I'm delighted and very happy and very pleased to welcome you to Capitol Hill. Some of your schoolmates and have been here before and have been such a wonderful group, and I know you're just as wonderful, maybe probably much better. But we're always happy to see you. Wish you well, and congratulations as you bring this assignment in your studies and in your life to an end. And I wish you well as you continue the journey, searching for truth and doing what you can to create a truly world at peace with itself as we move toward the 21st century.
You said in your book that you dreamed of being a minister. Do you think of your work in Congress as sort of a secular ministry?
Well, I do see my role in the Congress as an extension of my early dream as an outgrowth of my involvement in the civil rights movement, as an ongoing part of an effort to build a beloved community, to build an all-inclusive community, an all-encompassing community. When I was a very, very young child, you probably gleaned from the book that I really wanted to be a minister, and I practiced preaching to the chickens. And I tell that story, you probably read the story, that they tended to listen to me better than some of my colleagues listened to me today in the Congress. I said today that those chickens would bow their heads, some would shake their heads. They never quite said amen. But I think they understood what I was talking about.
Many students today refer to the civil rights movement as a part of history and not a current struggle. How can we encourage in young people today the spirit that inspired so many people in the civil rights movement in the 60s? And what are some of the current issues today?
Well, I think the civil rights movement, it is history, it's ongoing history. It is a history of 25, 30, 40, 50 years ago, but it is still history in the making. I think young people should do what you all are doing. And that's why I like for students from your school to come, and like for students and young people to come and to study, to learn. Because I think by studying, by reading about the civil rights movement, by reading books, writing papers, asking questions, looking at films, people learn. And hopefully people are inspired to pick up where those of us left off. It's an ongoing struggle. I've said in the past, and I said again now, that the struggle for civil rights, the struggle for human rights, is not a struggle that lasts for one day or 1 week or 1 month or 1 year. It is a struggle of a lifetime. And each generation must play a role in helping to remove the remaining scars and stains of racism, bigotry, anti-Semitism, intolerance. I think all of us must do that.
It seems today that we place a lot of significance on ethnic identities and roots. How can we maintain a balance between keeping ethnic ties and maintaining a sense of belonging to the larger community of America? Is your concept of the beloved community still possible in our modern society?
Well, I think it's possible, and I think we must appreciate diversity, recognize that we all are somewhat different, but at the same time, we all so much alike. To put it very simple, just maybe our foremothers and our forefathers all came to this country in different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter whether we're black or white or Hispanic or Native American, Asian American. We're one house, we're one people, we're one family. You know, in the book I tell a story about when I was growing up outside of rural Troy, Alabama, and you probably read the story. One Saturday afternoon, my aunt had all of us over, a group of us, about 13 or 15 of us, young children, many of my sisters and brothers, but several of my first cousins. And we were out playing in her dirt yard. She lived in a shotgun house, and it had an old tin roof. And this dirt yard, she didn't have a green manicured lawn that you see in many communities in California. But it was a dirt yard. And every Saturday, she would go and get some dogwood branches and tie these branches together and sweep this yard, sweep it very clean. And we were out playing in her dirt yard, and she didn't like the fact that we were playing in her dirt yard. But the storm came up, and she suggested that we all should go inside of the house. And we went in, as we were told. The lightning started flashing, the thunder started rolling, the wind started blowing, and the rain started beating on this old shotgun house. Now, a shotgun house is a house in the nonviolent sense where you can throw a ball through the front door and it will bounce out the back door. Or in the military sense, you can fire a gun through the front door and the bullet will exit the back door. She lived in this type of house. And the wind continued to blow, and the lightning continued to flash, and the thunder continued to roll, and the rain continued to beat on this old tin roof house. And she suggested that we all should hold hands. She thought this old house was going to blow away. She was scared. She was terrified. And my aunt started crying. And we all started crying as little children because we were terrified. So when one corner of the house appeared to be lifting from its foundation, we would walk to that side, trying to hold down this little house with our little bodies. When the other corner appeared to be lifting, we would walk to that side, trying to hold this house down with our bodies. So we were little children walking with the wind. I guess the point I'm trying to make here, that as Americans, we may be different. We may be black, we may be white, we may be young, we may be old, we may be rich, we may be poor, we may be Hispanic, or Asian American, or Native American. But we're all in the same boat. So we have to create one house, one family, and we must walk together. And that's what, in the Civil Rights Movement, we tried to do for the past 40 or 50 years. We were walking from Montgomery to Selma, or Selma to Montgomery, to Birmingham, to Nashville, to Atlanta, to Washington, trying to hold the American house together. So we must never leave the house. The lightning may flash, the thunder may roll, the rain may beat on the old house, the wind may blow, but we must stay together and never leave the house.
I'm wondering if you think the government has or should have a role in creating schools and other institutions in which, as you said, hope, compassion, and justice are prominent attributes.
Yeah, I think the government should play a role in helping to create the climate, the environment in education institutions in our schools. In many communities, I think we expect too much of our education institution. We dump a lot of our problems that should be solved in our homes and with our religious institution, our churches, our synagogues, our mosques. We just expect teachers to solve all of these problems. And there's a role for education institution to play. But there is also a role for the national government to play in helping to create a climate, helping to create an environment for people to learn, to study, to make resources available. The problem shouldn't be left just to the local community or to a particular town or to a particular city. So I think there's a role for the government to play. On the other hand, I think individuals, parents, private organization, people in the media, in business, in labor, in sports, we all have a role to play in helping to educate and keep our children and our young people informed and, in a sense, show them the way.
At the end of your book, you state that prayer is one of the most powerful ways humankind has of reaching out. Can you say more about this?
Well, I do think prayer is a very powerful instrument. I think it's a very powerful tool. And sometimes I think it's necessary for individuals for individuals of faith to steal away. I know sometimes people say, you know, we need prayer in the school. Now, I'm not going to, I believe in separation of church and state. On the other hand, I think young people pray all the time, especially if you have a very difficult exam to try to pass. I'm sure you call on somebody or some force to help me through it, help me make it through. So I think a lot of time, I think some of us, and I know I did it during the height of the civil rights movement, I didn't necessarily make words, but when there was a very difficult decision to make, when I was walking across that bridge at Selma, or going on a freedom ride, or sitting in, we were constant in prayer. You commune, you communicate, you reach out. So I could be sitting on the floor of the House before making a speech, whether it's dealing with going to war during the Gulf War, dealing with the whole question of impeachment. Just see me through it. So sometimes we have to have what I call an executive session with ourselves. And you have to talk to yourself. That may sound sort of strange. And I think in a sense you're praying. And sometimes you have to call upon the Almighty just to help me make it through the day.
How do you think that prayer can be? Is it as popular in use now, and now that today's society is less?
Well, a lot of people, I think, for different reasons, people don't like to talk about it. For many people, and I guess for many, especially people in public life, religion become a very personal, very private. But even here on Capitol Hill, we have a group called Faith and Politics, where, and it's not something sanctioned by the Congress, where a group of members, Democrats and Republicans, liberals, moderates, very conservative members, come together and we pray from time to time. We talk, we meditate, but we believe in action. We've been having what we call a conversation on race, a dialogue on race. We meet in our offices, in our homes, in little hideaways here on Capitol Hill. During the past 2 years, as a group, we've taken the same way that you come from California here. We travel as a group with some members of our staff, with lay people, ministers, other religious leaders, with spouses, to Selma, to Montgomery, to Birmingham, to study the civil rights movement. And while we were there, we went to, say we go to Birmingham, we go to the church where the Fuller girls was killed, where the church bombing took place. We go to the park where Bull Connor used dogs and fire hoses in 1963. We go to Montgomery and we visit with Governor Wallace last year before he died. We went to the spot where Rosa Parks was arrested on December 1st, 1955. We went to the Greyhound bus station where people was beaten in May of 1961. Went to the Civil Rights Memorial, the same young lady that designed the Vietnam Memorial, to design a memorial to all of the civil rights martyrs in Montgomery. So we went there and stood and sang and prayed. And then we went to Selma. We walked across the bridge together and we kneeled and prayed. And for some of these members who had never been South, and even some who grew up in the South, but they had never been to Selma, they never walked across the bridge, they said this was like a religious experience for them.
In your book, you write that there are clear differences between urban poverty and rural poverty. While inner city poverty is a situation of despair and pessimism, you describe a sense of dignity held by the rural poor, speaking of their tenacity and indomitable spirit. In our increasingly urbanized and material society, is there any way to transform the stigma of financial poverty into something other than despair?
Well, I think it's possible. I think it's possible. I think there's a great deal of despair in America. especially in our large urban centers, where there's a sense of hopelessness, where many people just given up. They feel left out, and left behind. And in many instances, they do not see major political figures or other influential leaders or symbols coming in saying something up. They do not have politicians like Robert Kennedy, for an example. Robert Kennedy had the ability, had the capacity to move around into our large urban centers and inspire people, or go into rural areas of the Deep South or into the Southwest, Indian reservation, and inspire people. And we don't have people with the capacity and the ability to do that. And I would like to see more and more elected officials and people, visible people, whether it be in entertainment or in sports, in the academic community, to spend time with children, with young people, with people not so young in our large urban centers. One reason I think we have a great deal of crime and violence and drug addiction in urban America is because of the lack of hope, the sense of hopelessness. And I think in so many ways the problem is so massive and so big that you need some intervention from forces from the outside, really, to give people that sense of hope, that sense of faith, that things can change. See, in most of our large cities in America, we never had an organized, a disciplined civil rights movement. And in many parts of the Deep South, including small towns and rural communities, you had organized, nonviolent efforts that gave people a sense of hope, a sense of optimism. People felt involved. They felt like they were participating in something. Their reports and studies would show that during the height of the civil rights movement, whether it was Montgomery or Birmingham or Selma or Jackson, Mississippi, or other small towns or rural community, the crime rate went down because people felt like they were involved in something very constructive. And I think the civil rights movement had a liberating effect on people in the South, where you didn't have the same type of effort in the urban centers in the North. And then another thing, in the South and the rural communities in particular, you have space. So I may be poor, I may not have all of the things that I need or want, but if I live in rural Alabama, rural South Georgia, or in the Delta, Mississippi, I can move around. Maybe my grandmother, my grandfather, maybe my uncles or aunt, maybe they have a garden and I can get some fresh vegetables. But I can breathe clean air. I'm not in some crowded housing project in New York City, or in Chicago, or in Detroit, or in Philadelphia.
Even with the important philosophical training you received in the tactics and spirit of nonviolence, how did you withstand the hatred and physical abuse in the actual situations?
As a participant in the civil rights movement, I grew to accept nonviolence as a way of life, as a way of living. I came to the point to believe that means and ends are inseparable. If you're struggling to create the beloved community, if that is the goal, if that is the end, then our means and our methods must be consistent with the goal, with the end we seek. We used to sing a song in the early days of the movement, keep your eyes on the prize. But if you're going to keep your eyes on the prize, you cannot be sidetracked. And then I was not going to get angry or become bitter or hostile because someone arrested me and jailed me, that someone attacked me, or because someone left me for dead, left me bloody and unconscious, because I saw those individuals as victims. And even said the person that beat you, the person that jailed you, the person that tried to kill you is your brother, And so I'm not going to hate, because hate is too dangerous, it's too heavy a burden to bear. And in the process of hating someone, I destroy my own self-worth, my own dignity. And then I try to make the point in the book that, you know, whether it was the Bull Connor in Birmingham or Sheriff Clark in Selma, Alabama, you know, people, Sheriff Clark or Bull Connor, they weren't born hating. At one time, they were little children. They were little babies. And so the whole question of environment and all of that. So somehow you have to find a way to reconcile people together, to win people over. And so we were not to destroy individuals, but to destroy customs and traditions and change bad laws. That's where you move toward community. And when you accept nonviolence as a way of life, as a way of living, you say to yourself and to others that it is a better way, it's a more excellent way. If you accept it only as a technique, or only as a tactic, it becomes like a faucet. You can turn it on and you can turn it off. And so you say it's much easier just to love everybody. Because if you try to choose who you're going to love and who you're going to hate, you'll be saying, well, today I like Sue, and tomorrow I won't care for Mary. Today I like Jack, and tomorrow I won't care for Joe or something. So just, it's tough, it's hard. You have to make all these decisions. Just love everybody. And that's why I said to young people and to children, don't be bitter, don't be hostile, be kind, and be loving.
Does every individual, no matter how hateful, have the potential to change?
Oh, I believe that. I believe within, and this may sound a little strange, but I believe that in the very being, in the very soul of every human being, there is a spark of goodness. There's a spark of the divine, and we don't have a right to destroy that. So if you believe that love is a much more powerful force, maybe love will beget love, and love can win people over. I think by using violent means and method, you may have some victories, but they're not lasting victories. Dr. King, and this may sound a little biblical here, but there's a verse in the New Testament that the great teacher used, and he says on one occasion something like, "Think not that I come to bring peace but a sword." He wasn't talking about a physical sword. He was talking about a spiritual sword, a spiritual force, that peace and order is not necessarily absent of tension and conflict. And sometimes it's necessary to stir things up, to bring out the goodness within the society or within people. And so during the 60s, from time to time, we were considered outside agitators. But Reverend Abernathy, a friend of Dr. King, one of the leaders of the movement, used to say in the washing machine, these old upright washing machine, there's a thing in the center of the machine called an agitator. And he said the agitator role was to take the clothes all around and all about, to beat the dirt out of the clothes, to bring the filth out. And said those of us in the South, we were agitators in the good sense of the word. We were bringing all of the dirt and all of the filth from under the southern rug, out of the cracks, out of the corners, to the top so we can deal with it. So sometimes it's necessary in a very positive way to be a force for good, not in a violent way, but in a nonviolent way.
In a comment you made regarding the 100th day of this Congress, you said Republicans have done nothing about a budget or children's health programs. Despite the fact that Republicans are in majority, is there anything Democrats can do to encourage these issues to be addressed?
We can, from time to time, we can do something. We can introduce legislation, children's health care bill. We can introduce education bills, but we don't have the votes to pass it unless we convince enough Republican members to come over and work with us. We have a campaign finance reform bill that some of the Republican members are supporting. We have what we call a discharge petition on the floor of the House now. And almost 200 Democratic members have signed this petition to get it to the floor. Not a single Republican member has signed it. In a few days, we're going to introduce what we call a patients' rights bill. And we're going to probably go through the discharge process also to try to get it out of committees, to get it on the floor, to get a vote on it. We're not in a position to set the agenda because we're in the minority, but we'll continue to teach, preach, and advocate for what those things that we believe we should be doing, and hope in the long run, in the process, we will win enough Republican members over to help us out. But the political process is much, sometimes slower, drawn out. Someone said something the other night, or maybe last night, a reporter said he covered every presidential candidate since 1960, every presidential campaign since 1960. He covered all of the scandals in Washington since Watergate, but he has never covered anything that gave him a greater satisfaction than the civil rights movement of the 60s. And sometimes I feel that way here in the Congress. I feel like, I passed this way before. Like I've seen it. What else can I see? Like I've been here. And I said sometimes to myself, when people make it so difficult to get things done today, it's so slow, so drawn out, and sometimes I feel like we're saying, we should just do it. Just do it. It's the right thing to do. Just do it. But sometimes it takes it almost impossible. It takes so long for 435 members of the House or 100 members of the Senate to agree on something and to get the approval of the President of the United States. And when you look back on the 60s, in comparison to today, we have all this technology. We have all this information. During the 60s, we didn't have a website. We didn't know anything about the internet. Never heard of it, really. We didn't have a cellular telephone. We didn't have a fax machine. And a group of people came together under the leadership of Martin Luther King Jr. with an idea and with a great deal of inspiration. And they had a little time, and they had their bodies, and they put their bodies and their lives on the line, and they changed the country forever. Yes?
Michael Sandel said, "The better response would be not to flee moral argument in politics, but to engage in it, to make it better, to offer a richer, more pluralistic, more democratic moral vision, drawing in some cases on religious traditions and on religious arguments." You talked about the dialogue that's happening between you and your colleagues. Do you think that moral arguments should play a larger part in our national political debate?
Oh, I think so. I think so. Because you get elected to Congress, elected President of the United States, because you're holding a position of Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Labor, Education, whatever, or because you're governor, you shouldn't check your sense of what is right and what is wrong, your sense of fairness, your sense of morality. You shouldn't check it at the door. It's not that you go around wearing your religious conviction on your sleeves. But I think we have a moral obligation and a mission and a mandate to bring something to our position, and something more than just an appetite. You understand what I'm saying? And I think the American people are becoming so wise, and I think they understand more and more within a lot of people in elected position. They know a workhorse from a show horse. They can see through them. They know a tugboat from a showboat. They know when a person is real. I think in so many instances, they're far ahead of most elected officials. Because too many of us as elected officials, especially when you get at the congressional level, and when you get in the White House in particular, you can be good as gold. You start worrying about the next election, and you start putting your finger in the air to see which way the wind is blowing, rather than going with your heart, going with your gut, and doing what is right.
The struggle against injustice and intolerance seems eternal. What steps can we take to get to the root of the hatred and understand where it comes from? And is this even possible?
I think it's possible. The laws can control behavior, maybe. I think maybe Martin Luther King Jr., maybe Chief Justice Warren, someone else said that once, others have implied. But they cannot necessarily change hearts. And Bobby Kennedy back in 1968 during this brief campaign said something like, there must be a revolution of value, must be a revolution in our hearts, in our minds, in our very soul, not in the streets. So you may pass a law to end discrimination in places of public accommodation. You may pass a law to keep people from killing someone because of their race, their color, their sex, or their sexual orientation. And we're debating all around the country on the state level, also on the federal level, hate crime laws. So you may be able to do that. But a law cannot make someone love you or like you. Maybe the law will keep someone from killing you. So I believe that you can have, through dialogue, through people working together, people getting to know each other, that sense of community, that sense of family. In the Civil Rights Movement, we used to call ourselves a coalition of conscience, a circle of trust, a band of brothers and sisters. I used to think that the only real integration that existed in America was that integration within the movement itself. That you had people, black and white, especially young people, that were struggling together. People that were sitting together. It didn't matter whether they were black or white. There were people who were putting lighted cigarettes out in their hair, down their backs, pulling them off the lunch counter stool. They were being beaten together, thrown in jail together. In some instances, like the 3 civil rights workers in June of 1964, dying together, 2 whites and 1 black. You become like a family. I think in America, in any society, we tend to fear what we do not know. And as people get to know people, you lose that sense of fear of someone else. In the Congress here, sometime on the floor of the House or in a committee room, Democrats and Republicans, we argue, we fuss, we fight like cats and dogs. But if you go on a trip together, you work out in the gym together, you have lunch together, dinner together, you travel to Selma, to Montgomery, to Birmingham together, you spend days and days together. We have every Thursday morning, 8 o'clock, there's a prayer breakfast. And then there's several small group of members get together without any announcement, and they sort of a meditation group. These people so they become brothers. They become brothers and sisters. They become family. And so it doesn't matter whether someone is black or white, a Republican, a Democrat, a liberal, We may disagree, our political philosophy and views, but we stand up for each other.
Michael Sandel, in an interview with Bill Moyers, asked the question whether self-government was possible under modern conditions. And he said, if it is possible, then how do we revitalize it? He went on to say that in America there's a certain minimal government and a minimal democracy that we have. What do you think are the biggest challenges to democracy, and how can we respond to these challenges?
Well, I think the biggest challenge to democracy, and to a democracy such as ours, our democracy is very young. It is very young. And in spite of all of the problems, I think we've done pretty well. It's growing. It's making progress. It is expanding. It is still in the process of becoming. In spite of all of our wealth and in spite of all of our resources, in spite of our new technology, there's still too many people in America left too far behind. The gap between the haves and the have-not, it's not narrowing, it is widening. There's still too many people in our democratic society, because of their race, their color, or their gender, are not treated like others. And we have to do something about that. So we have to continue to make it real. We talk about creating a more perfect union. It's not perfect yet. We got to make it a little more perfect. We're not there yet. We're in the process of becoming. So the great challenge, I think, as we move toward the 21st century, and as we continue to expand and open up this democracy, we got to do everything possible to equalize the situation. We say education is a great equalizer. Some of our young people, some of our children are not receiving the best possible education. There's still 40 million citizens without any form of health insurance. There's still too many people, children, low-income people, minorities, are dying before their time. So these are the challenges. We want as much freedom as possible. And then there's because of the technology, there are people, I'm talking about well-meaning people, saying, you got to do something about the internet. You got to, and then they want you to pass some law that's going to violate somebody's civil liberties. And how do you reach a happy medium? What do you do toward saying that certain things should be said, or certain things shouldn't be said, or certain things should be printed or shouldn't be printed? We cannot come to that point in America because of certain incidents. Instead, we're going to tell people what they can think, what they can read, what they can see. We cannot control people's thought. So I think these are some of the challenges in this new age. How do we want to control information? Do we want to tell the American people that you cannot read this, you cannot have this in a library, you cannot see this on the internet? And do we want members of Congress banning books? No. Do we want to tell the library in California or in Georgia or in Baltimore or in New York City that you cannot let people come in and read certain things? I don't think we want to come to that point. But somehow we must. These are, I think, some of the challenges that we're going to face in the days and years to come. And how do we learn to live together in a peaceful community, world community, with our brothers and sisters around the world? Do we become the policeman of the world? Or do we become caring and supporting partners of others to help create a peaceful community? That's some people are saying today that we don't have any business in Eastern Europe, that we shouldn't be in Kosovo. Some people say that's not our fight. That's not our struggle. Others are saying we couldn't stand by and see a modern day Holocaust take place. We couldn't stand for ethnic cleansing. We had to do something, we had to act.
Which do you think?
Now you're putting me on the spot. And, no, I supported our effort to stop ethnic cleansing. I supported our effort to prevent the modern day Holocaust from taking place. I don't think history would have been kind to us if we didn't do something. But I think we got to find a way to have a negotiated settlement. I don't like war. I don't like violence. But in this process, too many people are losing their lives, too many innocent people. When the initial bombing was seen to be directed toward infrastructure. And what makes the whole thing so sad and so difficult, we're bombing and bombing and bombing, destroying the infrastructure, buildings, bridges, waterways, power lines. And we're doing that this year. Next year, or maybe earlier, we're going to be calling up on the American taxpayers to help us rebuild it.
Drawing on your life experience, what is the most important piece of advice you can give our generation?
More than anything else, I would say to this generation of young people, be yourself. Be yourself. And enjoy life. Be guided by your own moral compass. And find something that is so dear, something that is so precious, so meaningful, that you want to be part of. That find a way, as I tried to say earlier, not just to be concerned about your own circumstances, but the circumstances of others. There's so many unmet needs. It could be in areas of education, healthcare, protecting and cleaning up the environment, working conditions someplace. But whatever you do, try to do it and do it so well that no one else can do it any better. Stay focused. Keep your eyes on the prize. My mother, in the book, I use a phrase, and sometimes it may get lost in the book. Well, when I was growing up, and my mother, and I don't know where she got it from, and she still said to me today sometime when I call home, this phrase is be particular. For me, she's saying to me to be mindful, to be watchful as you move through life. On the other hand, when she was saying be particular, she was saying your surrounding, your environment, be particular. And so during the past few years, I guess all of my life, I've tried to be particular, be mindful, be watchful. Because we only pass this way once. And I think, as Horace Mann said, we should be ashamed to leave this world until we've made some contribution to humankind.
Congressman Lewis, in your book you talk about the winds of history.
Yeah.
And you have felt the winds of history. And in a sense, I think what you're saying to the students here is somehow to put themselves in touch with that possibility of experiencing the winds of history. And could you say something about what that feels like to you? Because obviously you have felt the winds of history and been moved by them.
Well, I call it the wind of the spirit of history. I feel sometimes like I was caught up. I was caught up and lifted by the winds of history, of the spirit of history. And I don't think it's anything necessarily that I did or said. On the other hand, I think I put myself in the way. And sometimes you have to get in the way. You don't know what is going to happen. You don't know what the outcome is going to be. But you have to put yourself in the way. Just get in the way. And let the wind and the spirit of history be your guide. Now, I grew up in a very large family with 6 brothers and 3 sisters. A lot of first cousins, almost 100 on my mother's side alone. And then sometimes I wonder, why? What happened? Why did I get caught up? Did something reach down and touch me and pluck me up from rural Alabama? I like to think that I put myself in the way and was prepared and willing to let both the wind and the spirit of history lead me. Now, if someone had told me that one day I would come under the influence of Martin Luther King Jr., a young guy like Jim Lawson, who's now living in Los Angeles, who was our teacher of the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence, that I would get caught up in the sit-ins and the freedom rides and be where I am today, I would have said, you're crazy. You're out of your mind. You don't know what you're talking about. So when I started sort of on this journey, I didn't know one day I would be here. I'll be someplace else. Because not in a way that I could look 40 years or so down the road, or 50 years down the road. When I was 10 years old in 1950, I went downtown to the little town of Troy and tried to check a book out of the public library. And I was told by the librarian that the library was only for whites and not for colored. And I was denied the right to check a book out, and I was denied a library card. This was a library that was supported by the taxpayers. But I went back to the library, the Troy Pike County Library, on July 5th of last year, 1998, for a book signing, and hundreds of white and black citizens turned out. And they gave me a library card. So it took me from 1950 to July 5th, 1998 to get a library card. So you just have to go with the flow sometime.
Your children are not your children. They are the sons and the daughters of life, longing for itself. They come through you, but they are not from you. And though they are with you, they belong not to you. You can give them your love, but not your thoughts. No, no. They have their own thoughts. They have their own thoughts. You can house their bodies, but not their souls. For their souls dwell in a place of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You can strive to be like them, but you cannot make them just like you. Strive to be like them, but you cannot make them just like you.
Your children
are not your children. They are the sons and the daughters of life, longing for itself. They come through you, but they are not from you. And though they are with you, they belong not to you. You can give them your love, but not your thoughts. They have their own thoughts. They have their own thoughts. You can house their bodies, but not their souls. For their souls dwell in a place of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You can strive to be like them, but you cannot make them just like you. Strive to be like them, but you cannot make them just like you.
Wonderful.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. Thank you.